Welcome back to our C Sharp beginner tutorial. In the previous lesson, I think we looked at constructor overloading, static variables, and instance variables, their differences. I think we also looked at what happens when an object is not properly initialized. That's the null reference exception. In today's lesson, we're going to look at private fields. So all this while, we've always been using public fields. Okay. And what I mean by public fields is that in our class, in our employee class, in fact, let's go ahead and open up Visual Studio. So this is the program we wrote in the previous lesson. I think this is the employee class. Okay. In this our example employee class, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields. We can exclude this one because we said this one is not an instance field. It's a static field. So the variable belongs to the class. So that means every object that is created, every employee object that is created is not going to have this particular field. So we're going to, I think it might be safe to say, we'll ignore that for now. The ones we are mainly concerned with is the instance fields. That's the fields that belong to every single object that comes out of the employee class. And notice what we've been doing all this while. We've always been setting them as public, meaning we can access them from anywhere within our program. Okay. So that means that if we create an employee object from anywhere, say for example, we created an employee object from this class, from this program class, and after creating our employee object, which we keep it inside employee one, that's here. This is where we created the object, new employee, and we assign it into employee one variable. You can see right away we can immediately start accessing our first name variable, our middle name variable, our last name variable. Okay, those are the fields because they are public. Okay, because they are public, we can immediately access them. We can set them, we can assign values to them from outside the employee class. Okay, now I'm not sure if this is the if it is too early to start introducing you to what we call encapsulation, but I think, okay, let me bring up Notepad so I just write that. But I just feel, I think it's a good thing you get an idea, or it's always a good thing to make sure your classes are well encapsulated. That's encapsulation is written like this, encapsulation. Okay, so it's always a good thing for a class to be well encapsulated. Okay, now encapsulation actually means protection of your fields, of your instance fields, or instance members, actually, not just fields, even the method. So we'll call it instance members. Okay, members is a collection of both fields and methods are generally known as members. So protection of your instance members from external access. Okay, that's what encapsulation is. Okay, so you try, what you try to do is you try to make sure that your fields and your methods, okay, not all the methods are actually, because definitely you need some methods to be accessible. So let's say protection of your fields, let's say instance fields and some instance methods. Okay, I think that's a better definition of what encapsulation is, because it's not every method that you want to protect, you want to restrict access from external access. Okay, you want some methods to be accessible. That some methods, some instance methods of the class, you want them to be accessible from outside the class. That's from another class. Okay, so yeah, that's what encapsulation is all about. Okay, you want to make sure all your fields are protected such that they cannot be altered from outside the class. Okay, what it's not like you don't want them to be altered entirely. No, you do want them. You provide accessibility when they want to be altered. You provide, that's why some methods are accessible. Okay, you provide some methods that will serve as being they will serve as your channel where whenever you want those protected instance fields to be altered, it is through those instance methods that some of them some of those instance methods will be public. They will be allowed, they will be given access from outside the class so that those fields can be altered or can be accessed. Okay, I'm not sure if everything I'm saying is going to make any sense to you, but I think by the time we write some code, you'll get what I mean. Okay, so right now, let's go back to Visual Studio. Right now, if you look at the way our first name, middle name, and last name are, ID, number, gender, and age, we can immediately just call employee1 dot first name and provide and change the value. Okay, we can change the value of this employee1 dot first name from outside the class. That's from program.cs. Now, this is not advisable in object-oriented programming. Okay, this is poor encapsulation. Okay, because in fact you have not encapsulated your first name at all. Okay, your first name variable is directly accessed, okay, from outside the employee class, which is generally, it's not going to be like do not do it all the time. No, it's just like take it as an advice. Okay, it's like an advice for good programming practice, that all your fields of a class, always make sure you protect them such that something like this cannot happen. Okay, you can't just access or change the value directly from outside the class. Okay, from inside the employee class, it is allowed. Okay, it is good practice, or it is allowed. You can always access your first name, your middle name, your last name, all your fields. You can always do whatever you want as long as you are within the employee class. You can go ahead and set access them and do whatever you want to do, alter their value whenever you feel like, within, as long as you're within the employee class. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, but now to go into explanation of why that is bad, I think this is not this probably not the class to because we're going to head into very long discussion of some complicated well, not very complicated, but maybe they're not suitable for beginners. Okay, let's just take it that there are some advanced discussion, okay, of programming practices. Okay, so the thing we're going to do in this class is we'll just explain how you can encapsulate your fields. Okay, we'll show you how you can do it and how you can provide access via accessor methods. Okay, so let's go back to Notepad. Whenever I say a word I feel is a keyword, and you will always see them in books, in textbooks. Whenever you read textbooks, I always make sure I write them down, so you see sorry, not text. accessor methods. Okay, so they are they are actually methods. They're just normal methods, but the reason they are called accessor methods is that they just their whole function, that's their whole aim of those methods, is just to provide accessibility to those encapsulated fields. Okay, that's the whole reason for them existing. Okay, the reason they exist, accessor methods, that's the reason you create them, is to provide accessibility to those fields, those protected fields of your class from outside the class. Okay, let's go ahead and see how we can encapsulate some of our fields. So these fields, the first name, the middle name, the last name, the ID number, the gender, and the age, if we want to encapsulate these fields so that they are only accessible within the class, all we need to do is just change this public to private. Okay, it's as simple as that. I think this should this should just show you how you do it. Okay, as whenever you mark a particular variable or field as private, all you're telling the compiler is, please do not allow these fields to be accessible, to be directly accessible from outside the class. Okay, so let's go ahead and just make all of them private. Okay, so private string gender, private int age, and we can leave this one, like I said, because it's a static variable, so we can let it to be public. Okay, let's go ahead and save this, but notice what happens by us making these fields private. Notice that if we go back to our program.cs, we get all these errors because they are telling us that we cannot directly access these fields. Okay, now notice this is where we initialized using the direct method. That's the first way. When we initialized the object, we initialize the employee object without using the constructor, because this was the default constructor. And notice an advantage of this constructor. Notice that we can actually use this constructor and initialize our object, our employee object, even though those fields are made private. So we can keep this, we can note that down as part of the advantages of using this kind of constructor, overloaded constructor. Okay, that's another advantage of using this kind of constructor to initialize your object, to properly initialize your object. Okay, so notice by making our fields private, we still don't have to make any change to this line of code. Okay, however, for these ones, if we want to access the first name, now what we need to do is we need to create an accessor method that is going to be a normal method that allows us to set values from outside the class to these first name, middle name, last name, ID number. Okay, now to do that, we'll just go back to our employee class and provide those accessor methods. Okay, so for each usually, okay, let me just explain this. There are some private fields that you would create, or some private variables that you will create in your classes, okay, that you do not, in fact, you do not want them to be accessible from outside the class, no matter what. Okay, now for those kind of private variables, you do not need to create accessor methods for them. Okay, just note that down. The private variables that you create accessor methods for are those private variables that you know that from outside the class you will need to to be able to access them. Okay, those are the private variables you create accessor methods for. Okay, so we're going to see how to create accessor methods. Like I said earlier, accessor methods are normal methods. The only thing is that they're going to be public. Okay, the reason they are public is because you want to be able to call them, or you want to be able to access them from outside the class. Okay, so for example, let's take this first name, this private string first name. If we want, usually the accessor methods they come in pairs. Okay, one method is going to allow you to set that, to change the value of the value stored inside the variable. That's one. Then the other method is going to allow you to call or get the value that's to obtain, like to extract. Okay, to extract the value residing inside that variable. Okay, we usually call it a get accessor. Okay, the one that sets the value, we call it a set accessor, and the one that gets the value, we call it a get accessor. Okay, in some other textbooks you see them as getters and setters. Okay, so to create the getter for the first name, we'll say public. Now the getter accessor, since we're going to get a value, it's going to return a value. Okay, and the kind of value it's going to return is going to be the same data type as the variable. Okay, now the data type is string, so it's going to be a string, public string, and usually it's not cast in stone. Okay, it's just a naming convention used for accessor methods. They're usually called get. You usually start with a capital G, et, get, and then you normally use the name, the identifier that you use as the name of the private variable. Okay, so since it's first name, however, notice we've already started with the get, so the first here is going to start with a capital F, even though this one started with a small f. Okay, so it's going to be something like get first name. Okay, and then open your normal bracket and close your normal bracket. Now it's not going to take any argument. Okay, and then you open your curly bracket, close your curly bracket. Now inside the curly brackets, this is where because it's going to return a value. Notice it's a string, meaning it's going to return a string. Inside you will just return the value that that's the variable. Okay, the value stored inside the variable. So you're just going to return first name here. I know this is going to look like it's like we're not, why do we need the method? Okay, but believe me, this little method you just wrote is going to be very, very important. Okay, inside when you start looking at object oriented programming, you're going to see why these accessors, okay, this getter method is very, very useful. Okay, for now, like I said in this, don't worry too much if you don't understand why we are creating it. For now, just know that it's good practice to always protect your variables and create getters and setters for them. Okay, that's in your classes. Okay, now this is the getter method for the first name. Next, we're going to create the setter method for the first name. So we're going to say public. Now the setter methods are going to be void because they do not return any value. Okay, the setter methods just take, like, you provide them with a value, and they take that value that you give them and they set it as the new value for the private variable that you're protecting. Okay, so public void, and then they usually start with set, and then you use the name of that's the identifier name that you use for the private variable. So in this case, it's going to be set first name. Also notice the first name starts with a capital F. Okay. Now remember, these are just identifiers. Set first name is just an identifier. Get first name is just an identifier. So it can be anything you choose. However, like I said earlier, it's always good to use identifier names that make sense. And this is usually the convention that is used, the naming convention that is used in most, even in Java programming language, they use this naming convention. The only difference in Java, I think this get usually starts with a small g and the set starts with a small s. But apart from that, it's exactly the same naming convention. Okay, so always try to stick to the naming convention. Okay, and then you create the body for your method, and then I also forgot to mention that since it's a setter method, it means you are expecting something like some value to be given to you, and the value that's going to be given to you has to have the same data type as the value of the variable, which is string. The data type has to be string. So you're going to be expecting an argument here. It's going to be a string, and the name of the argument, you can call it, you can actually call it anything, but in this case, I think we'll just call it first name with an underscore. I know this is probably very bad naming convention. Some people would think it's very bad using the underscore because usually the first name, okay, let me just explain something. Usually in private variables, the naming convention actually used in so many that I've seen so many programmers use it is that whenever you use a private variable, you actually use this underscore. Okay. Now I'm not a big fan of it. Okay, I don't really like having my private variables have starting with underscore. However, I prefer the private variables written normally, and then the arguments that are passed, okay, they start with underscores. Okay, so this is a local variable. This first name is a local variable. It's an argument that that is usually passed. So like a value is going to come in through here when set first name is called. Okay, and that's the one I prefer to use the underscore for. Okay, so this is something you're not going to see common in other naming conventions, but it's just my style. Okay, like I said, it can be anything. You can call it anything, but just make sure you give it a name that's going to make sense later, so that when other programmers use your classes, they're going to know without them being told. Like you don't even need comments to tell them that this is what this particular local variable is for. Okay, so inside, apart from different from the getter accessor, the setter accessor does not return anything. Like we said, it's a void method. However, inside the what it's supposed to do is that it's supposed to set the value of the private first name to whatever value is passed here. Okay, so we're going to say first name is equal to underscore first name. Okay, so we're taking this that's coming in as argument, and we're just assigning it. We're assigning this first name whatever value that's coming in. Okay, good. Now I'll just go ahead and save this, and I'll go back to the program.cs, and I'll show you how you use the setter methods. Okay, so now here, if you notice, we're trying to set the value of employee1.firstName, but it is complaining that first name does not exist. Okay, because well, it's not actually that it does not exist, it's that it is not accessible because it is private. You cannot access it from inside the program class. So what we're going to do, instead of saying employee1.firstName equals Abdul, we do know we want to set it as Abdul. So what we'll do is we're going to call employee1 dot, and then we say set first name. Notice our setter method now appears as part of, in fact, let's put the dot. If you look at as part of the methods that we have for this particular object, notice that set first name is part of the listed methods. So that's the one we're going to use. We're going to say set first name, and instead of using an equal sign, we're going to use our normal open bracket, which means it is a method, and this is the value that we're passing. This Abdul is the value, this string, this literal Abdul string is the value that we're passing. Notice when we write this code, what actually happens is that inside the object, it calls this method, this particular method, and this underscore first name automatically takes the value of this Abdul that we've just passed, okay? Because this is the argument that's passed, okay? So it automatically takes the value of this first name. And notice what happens inside the method. It now takes whatever is inside first name and it sets it to this private variable, okay? So instead of doing that, employee1 the first name equals Abdul, which is not going to work, by the way, because employee1 the first name is not accessible. You can actually set the first name like this, okay? All right, we can now, for the middle name, last name, ID number, gender, age, you're supposed to actually do exactly the same thing, the same way you created these getter method and a setter method, okay? That's how you're going to do for the middle name. Like, in fact, let's just go ahead and do that. So we're going to say public string get middle name. I think this is going to take us a long time, so I'll just pause the video and go ahead and type it out, and then when I'm done, I'll unpause the video, okay? Okay, I've finished typing out all the getter and setter methods of all the variables. That's the first name, middle name, last name, ID number, gender, and age. If you can see, here is the getter and setter for the first name. Here's the getter and setter for the middle name. Here's the getter and setter for the last name. Here's the getter and setter for ID number, and then getter and setter for gender. Finally, getter and setter for the age. Notice that the only difference between the getter and setter of the age and the other getters and setters is that for the age, it's int. So the get age is expected to return an integer value, okay? Also, the argument that goes that comes out of the underscore age variable is going to be an of integer data type. So you expect an integer to be passed, okay? Now let's just go ahead and save that and go back to our program.cs, and notice all these places where we're trying to set the middle name equals something, last name equals something. We're supposed to be using the setter method, okay? So we'll go ahead and just say set middle name, and we're not going to use an equal sign since it's a method. Instead, we're going to just put those into normal brackets. Same here, set last name. The last name, remember the method name starts with capital S, capital L, and capital N. And also don't forget to remove the equal sign and use a normal bracket. Okay, and employee1 dot set ID. The I is a capital I, and we remove the equal sign, open a normal bracket, close a normal bracket. This is going to take some time, so I'll pause the video again, and Okay, we're back. Okay, so I've been able to finish typing out the corrections. So you can see now, instead of using our variables directly from employee one dot first name and assigning it a value, what we're doing is we're indirectly calling this method, this set first name method. So for employee one, we're saying employee one dot set first name, and we give pass this value inside as argument. Okay, so when this occurs, notice that you're not directly changing the first name value. What you're doing is, on behalf of yourself, you're delegating, um, you're saying, okay, hey, the set first name method, could you please set the first name variable, that's a private variable, to this Abdul. Okay, you're saying that via this definition. Okay, if we look at the set first name definition inside the employee class, this is what is actually going on behind the scenes. Okay, so it's taking whatever value you give it, and it's setting the first name variable as whatever value you give it. Okay, notice that even though you're calling the set first name from outside the class, the actual setting of the first name is actually occurring within the class. Okay, so when you call it from the program class, you're only calling it. Okay, the actual setting of the value is actually occurring within the employee class, and this is exactly what object-oriented programming wants or prefers. Okay, it doesn't really want you changing or altering the values of your variables or fields of a particular object from outside, or of a particular class from outside that class. Okay, it's not advisable. It's always better to protect your variables using the private accessor, private access modifier, and then creating that if you do want to be able to access the variable from outside the class, you create accessor methods. That's a getter and a setter. The getter is used when you want to get the value, okay, the current value of that particular private variable. Okay, and the setter method is used when you want to change the value of that particular variable. Okay, and yeah, those two getters and setters, they act as delegates. Okay, when you want to get the value, you just say, notice that they are public. Okay, meaning you can actually call them from outside the class. Okay, however, the values they are protecting are actually private. Okay, they are marked as private, so you cannot directly access these variables. Okay, so that's what the private accessor method is all about, and that's what the private access modifier is all about, and that's also what accessor methods are all about. Okay, I think in the next class, I'm not going to handle that in this class. I'll take it to the next class. We'll look at properties. Okay, we'll look at the whole idea of properties. I think I've been mentioning properties, and I've been saying we're going to see what they are later. So in the next class, we're going to look at properties. Properties are actually just a combination of accessor methods and private variables. Okay, so what happened is that C sharp, what C sharp does is that it just looks at, okay, so for almost all your private variables that you have, you're going to be creating getter and setter methods for them. So instead of doing that, notice the lines of code. Okay, it's just cumbersome. I mean, having to write all these. Imagine if we had 20 private variables that we all want to be accessible from outside the class, it means we're going to write a whole lot of code for those 20 variables. For each variable, we're going to write two accessor methods. Okay, you can see the thinking behind properties in that sense. Okay, so what properties try to do is that they try to give you a shorthand, okay, like a shortcut for creating these two accessor methods and also a private variable at the same time. So you're going to create the private variable and its accessor methods, all using only one property. Okay, that's the whole idea behind properties in C#. Okay, so we're going to look at properties and how to create them. So rather than having to create a private variable and two accessor methods, you can just create one property which is going to stand in place of all those three items. Okay, all those three members. Okay, so we're going to look at properties in the next class. For now, this is, by the way, let's go ahead and run this program to show you that there's no actual any difference in the way the program is going to run. Okay, the same thing that happened in the previous lesson is the same thing that's going to happen. So we'll just run the program, make sure everything is working. So as we can see, let me just enlarge that. As you can see, everything is working and is in order. The only difference is that we have made our employee class much better by encapsulating the its fields. We've protected the fields and we've made them inaccessible from outside the class. And we have gone ahead and created accessor methods. So if anybody wants to, if any class wants to access these fields, where's my mouse pointer? If any class wants to access these fields, it has to do that through the accessor methods. Okay, so I'm going to end this lesson here and I'll see you in the next class.